Now, that is the kind of crisp audio engineering that only comes from a professional podcast crew like we have here on the Rec Poker Podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone, folks. It's another week of the Forums edition. I'm your host, Jim Reed, Bluffsterini in the home game. And if you go to rec.poker/crew, you can find out about me and everyone else on the Wrecking Crew, like this panel of wizards that I get to spend every Monday night talking poker strat with. Panel, why don't you tell the group a little bit about yourselves?
I am Chris Jones. I am 5x5 on PokerStars home game and on Twitter.
And I am John Somsky. I am Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Rabman50 everywhere.
It's true. I've seen the back of his underpants, and it's written in there on the waistband too. He goes everywhere. He's
what were you doing there, Jim? What were you doing there?
It was
pretty bad.
It was St. Oswald's Day. There was a special occasion.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. When you bent down to pick up the
it was your second final table trophy. That's right.
Yeah. He had too many trophies on, and it was weighing him down.
Oh man.
Just in case you were wondering, we do have a good time on the podcast here. This group of guys does get along pretty well. And I do enjoy the occasional grolsch from time to time, so you can put it at their feet if you like. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this week. Just like every week, I want to thank website AMP and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Just like every week, we're playing in the Rec Poker Nightly home game, trying to steal each other's chips. And just like every week, we are going to take a post from the Rec.Poker forums and talk about it here on the show tonight. So this week, we're looking at a post by our friend ARW, Adam Wolf, who does these wonderful forum posts that he breaks down all the combos. He talks about opponents' range in a very detailed fashion. So I will tell everyone, like I always do, please go to rec.poker, get a free account, and just check out the forum post here for yourself. This one's called Blind versus Blind, and you can get all sorts of great details that we won't touch on tonight. But we want to talk just a bit about blind versus blind dynamic, playing wide ranges post flop, and what that means for our hand ranging, our value betting, our bluff catching, and just generally how we should be approaching spots like this. So right off the bat, let's just talk about blind versus blind play generally. Assuming that we're not heads up, this is going to be a spot where the small blind player, it's folded to them. They have an opportunity to limp or raise, and they're going to be out of position the whole hand. The big blind gets to be in position the whole time. If it was heads up, that would be switched around, but let's just assume that it's not. So in a moment like this, if you are the small blind, you have an opportunity to limp in to complete or to open raise. Is there a stack size that like makes that decision for you? Or is there a type of hand that you like to use in those cases? Or is it villain dependent? Or do you just always open raise? Or panel, walk me through your thoughts in that moment. What factors into your decision?
If I'm not heads up, I will almost always from the small blind, if I'm going to play it for a raise. I'll never just complete the blind and let the big blind play for free. Because I'm going to be out of position for the entire hand, I also make it a fairly sizable raise, larger than if I were in position. Not only that, but you also have the big blind who has already has a chip in the pot or already has a blind in the pot. So they're getting a discount on whatever they put in. So I tend to bet fairly large, and then I just make my range such that that's a profitable situation. So a fairly tight range.
Okay, I just want to jump on that point there because I know you guys have some other thoughts to share, but we often think about like, okay, here's our hand. What's the bet sizing that's right for this hand? And what John's doing is he's thinking about what is the way I want to play my entire range here? Like, what's the sizing that my entire range is going to be suited by for this spot? And then he picks the sizing that's going to have the effect on his opponent's range that he wants. and he chooses his own range to fit that sizing. So I think that's a really advanced and sophisticated way to be thinking about this, because I think poker is a game of spots, right? It's a game of leveraging your opponent. And if you can find a way to use sizing to make that easier, I think that's really smart, reverse engineering it like that. Chris, I know when you get to heads up, you like to split things up a little bit, but when you're in full ring, what's your take on this?
I'm still a big fan of splitting my range. And I like to have in my limping range, it's the one position where I have a limping range, and I like to construct that with most of my premiums, like my really big, aces, kings, queens. I like to limp with, and then I like to follow that up, limping it with hands uh, that are more trashy, that are like right at the bottom of the kind of range that maybe I want to see a flop with, if the big blind will let me in cheap, but I'm not going to feel too bummed about having to pitch it. And then otherwise I do, if I am gonna open or raise, then I like John sizing. I like to go big from the small blind, 3.5 to 4 big blinds, depending on the stack size. And it also is a little bit villain dependent for me. Um, there are aggressive villains where I will limp my entire range and adjust how much I'm raising back. And then there are villains where I will only open against. So it is dependent, but if it's an unknown villain and I'm in this spot, I like to kind of split my range that way.
And Chris, is that stack dependent, or is that
Yeah.
in any spot? Yeah.
Yeah, no, we're talking, fairly deep stacked. Once we get down to, um, once we get a little bit short, then I'm shifting to a limp or shove strategy.
I think I'm very, very similar to Chris, but I definitely will limp a little bit more than he does. But I think my premiums in a place where I don't know who the big blind is or what he's capable of, I'll probably raise my premiums just as I would in any other situation. I'll also raise offsuit king 3, for instance. Hands like that, hands with a big top card and a reg. I don't have any problem raising with those. Then now I'll limp with anything that's kind of what Tommy Angelo calls a straighter, like a 7-4. I'll limp with 7-4 offsuit all day long. I do have the raises I pick are more the high card, low card for bluffing, but I do have a normal raising range, which would be a lot of the premiums, the pairs, and things like that. But I like what he said about villain dependent, because if I know that there's a guy that's very, very aggressive, I will change it up and I will limp some of those strong hands, expecting him to try to take the pot away from me, and then I can attack him back again with that premium hand. So in that case, I'm going to change it up a little bit because of the villain.
Yeah, and it seems like to me, this is one of those spots where villain tendencies is really important, because you're going to be out of position the whole hand. You get a chance from the very beginning to start chipping away at their range in a very predictable way. And you can predict a lot of how this is going to go out, if you have information on the villain. So I'm always thinking about, what is my default position, and just personally, I'm more of a default 2.5 opener from the small blind. I don't really have a completing range. I haven't made that sophisticated I love the idea. I want to build a whole limping range from every position. I feel like it's this fun part of the decision tree that hasn't been examined properly yet. I know it's kind of ridiculously impossible to do it. But the small blind does feel like somewhere that you could express an edge, a skill edge, over your opponents by
Mhm.
even out of position, playing small pots against wide ranges.
Mhm.
And wide ranges um, is where that's where the real poker players come to play. That's where you get to like play the opponent.
Yeah, and even though you're out of position, because it's a limped pot, when you do this, one of the things that's sort of like you almost have position because you don't like that's the one of the things I like about this blind versus blind dynamic is that you can limp from the small blind. If the big blind checks behind, you can see bet a lot from the small blind. Um, Unlike in most hands where when you're out of position, you sort of need to let the other player take the first initiative, and you can take down a lot of pots this way, pretty cheaply and pretty uneventfully.
Well, but you can even cheaper and less eventfully pre-flop, right? Like against some of those same garbage hands. Like that's the
Right.
tension. Do you ever feel, Chris? So I guess part of this, I don't put myself in the spot very often where I'm now playing these limped pots from the blinds out of position. Do you feel like awkward, or like are you in tough spots as a consequence? And how do you make that
Yeah,
work?
but I mean, like, the thing about it is like the hands Rob was talking about, right? Like the straight like 7-4 offsuit, right? Do you really want to be raising that?
Right.
I don't know,
Right.
but and it's the kind of hand where like I don't know, for half a blind I can put it, I can call here. Maybe I hit a straight, maybe I hit two pair, but if I don't and he doesn't raise from the big blind, I can lead out and win this hand anyway. So it's
Exactly.
those kind of
Yes.
hands that make a lot of sense.
Hell, if you hit a 4, you can lead out
Yeah,
because
right,
it's hard to make a pair.
Yeah.
And if all he's done is called, is limped, is just,
He's just checked. Yeah.
checked it back, well, he doesn't have anything. And so one pair on a board like that, I mean, if you hit a 7 or a 4, you're probably golden. You
yeah,
can go out and bet that out. And it has a lot more. See, I know what you're saying, Jim. You'd like to just raise and get it over with, but you have the potential of actually making more money,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
by limping some of those little hands, and it's only costing you half a blind to do it.
Yeah.
So you limp some of those small hands, and if you happen to hit something, let's say you hit, let's say that you hit a 5-6-8 flop, and he's got
Right.
8-6. I mean, you're printing money now.
That's true. Yep. And I think, okay, so let's talk a little bit about the range generally. I know we go down these rabbit holes. Adam,
yeah. We haven't
our
we haven't
original
even got
poster,
to that.
we're not even getting to the question. That
By the way, Adam's in the big blind in this hand, just for reference. But carry on, Jim.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the small blind some more.
So, all right. So I want to get into this a little bit. So we're talking about how we're going to raise with our premiums. We're going to raise with other hands that have a high blocker and garbage, like the King 3 offsuit, stuff like that. We're going to raise with some of our like suited connectors and suited broadways and stuff. We're going to limp with our hands like 7-4 offsuit, 7-10 offsuit. What are we folding? Is it anything? Are we just continuing with 100%, or are we actually folding anything? And if so, what are those?
And that's why I love the Tommy Angelo thing, the waiting for straighters too. Like I like 9 deuce, 9-4, those are gone. Like
Get rid of it.
I
Yep.
want so if it doesn't have a really high card in it, or it doesn't have the capability of making a flush or a straight on a flop, it's gone for me.
Yep.
I'm
Yeah,
trying
so
to
you
select.
might be 65%. You might be playing 65% of hands, but there's still that 35% of really crap that you're going to fold no matter what.
Right. And I think it might actually be less than that mathematically, the way we're talking about it, because we're really talking about like offsuit, offsuit hands that don't have a high card or connectedness. And then we've already pointed out on a previous episode that if a hand has a 10, there's a lot of straights it can hit. So we're basically, that is a pretty small chunk of range that we're folding there, which is cool. Which is the way I like to play. Wide ranges, right? Okay. Have we not heard from Jonathan Little yet today over the course of this episode? Oh my
No, I
God,
don't think
we've
so.
done a great disservice to the poker community. Hold on just one sec so we can rectify that.
Ever wondered whether you should call a preflop raise or 3-bet instead? What do you do when you have a flush draw? Do you raise it or do you just call? What do you do with ace king when you miss the flop? Are you tired of guessing about what the right play is with your particular hand? Well, my name is Jonathan Little, and I am a 2-time World Poker Tour champion and creator of PokerCoaching.com, where we offer over 1,000 interactive hand quizzes where you play a hand and then get real-time feedback from our world-class pros. Don't guess and don't stress. Just register for your free account at PokerCoaching.com/recpoker right now.
And I heard from Jonathan that if he catches anybody guessing or stressing, there's going to be trouble. There's going to be a problem. So don't guess, don't stress, just go do what the man says. And honestly, save yourself some trouble. You don't want to get this guy mad. All right. So as Chris points out, our correspondent Adam is not in the small blind. He's in the big blind. So we're kind of shaping what is, from their perspective. In fact, Chris, you're going to love this. The funniest part about this is they don't even describe the pre-flop action. I'm not sure we can tell you whether they limped or opened the small blind.
By the pot,
okay,
I think you can tell this
good
is limped.
Good point. So well, you guys tell me right now, should we go into the hand or do you want to just save this for like a part 2 while we talk the first one about opening raising ranges from the small blind, and then on part 2 talk about ARW's actual post? What do you guys think? Totally live call right now.
And then I think our new motto could be, come listen to the Forum podcast where we ignore your post for the first one and then answer it in the second one.
It's kind of becoming a theme.
Well, yeah, but it's a blind versus blind. So we have to talk about that dynamic. So now we've laid the groundwork to know that the small blind is going to limp the type of hands that we just talked about him limping.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
So this is perfect. It works out perfect for the post.
And let me talk about this because, okay, so now we're in the big blind. The small blind has limped to us. This is also a spot where I think we have to decide what do we check back and what do we raise. And again, what I like in these spots is to sort of divide up my hands between the hands that I'm gonna, unlike the Tommy Angelo ones, the ones I'm gonna raise are the ones that I either want to get a lot of chips in because I've got really strong value or really strong whatever, or I could care less if I have to eject this hand. And our correspondent has 10-4 offsuit. This might be a raising candidate for me. I like raising this better than like 10-9 offsuit. I'd like to just see a flop with 10-9 offsuit or 10-8 offsuit. This is now you gotta sort of figure out, because if you're gonna raise every garbage offsuit hand,
right,
you're gonna be raising a lot.
Right.
So, but this is one that I like raising with tens. They're an interesting card. They're right in the middle. They're gonna have a lot of blocker value potentially on like some straighty boards and some things like that. So if you actually raise and get called, it's not that bad, but it's also one where if you get re-raised, you can easily get rid of it without giving it a second thought. So this is the type of hand that I might raise as a bluff.
I like that. I mean, I just think it's such a sexy concept. I remember when I was learning poker, when I was sort of evolving as a player, the notion of 3-betting the bottom of your range just blew my mind, right? It's like, it's just such a beautiful part of the strategy of poker, and using those kind of garbage hands to make money when other people won't is something that, we don't appreciate how valuable it is, the times that players fold middle strength hands, because those are what everyone makes money with good hands. Everyone loses money with bad hands. If you can make your opponents fold better hands than you, that's kind of how you make money in poker, right? And otherwise, not making bigger mistakes, winning more when you win, losing less when you lose. But ultimately, if the part of your range that's not very good can extract value from the parts of other people's range that is better than your range, that's skill. That's not just math working in your favor. That's not just the law of averages.
Especially true if you if you think that you have an opponent who is just limping, like that they don't have value in their limping range, then I think you can start to raise these kinds of hands with absolute impunity, and they're just going to fold to you, and it's kind of awesome.
It is. It's a great feeling, isn't it? It is. It's like, yeah, it's part of one of the things that I don't know about you guys. One of the things I love about poker is this sort of, my opponents are trying their best to beat me, and I'm just taking them to the woodshed. Like I guess I'm getting older, and this is my only competitive arena that remains. But I mean, that's what makes me love this game so much, among many other things, of course.
I think it's very, very seldom that the big blind actually raises you when you limp in the small blind. It's such a small portion of times that happens. So that if it's happened to me at least once, the next time I limp with the small blind, I'm going to have a hand that can definitely call a raise, if not re-raise over the top of them. Otherwise, I'm not going to limp to this person anymore. The minute he raises once, I'm probably not going to limp against him anymore, because I don't want, that to continue to happen. So I'm going to make sure that if he does it once, the next time he does it, I'm going to be ready.
Yeah. And we talked about this earlier, right? Like this is a spot where villain tendencies is really important.
Correct. Yep.
And I've even got a stat on my HUD, not on the Rec Poker HUD, because there's only room for so many stats on the Rec Poker HUD, but on the Give Taylor Moss a Seizure, the comprehensive HUD that I put out there, I've got a stat up there that is just, how does the big blind respond to small blind opens? And if they fold a lot, that's going to really influence how I choose to play that position. And if they don't fold a lot, that is also going to impact that. So, data. It's all about just like finding out how does your opponent tend to respond, and then put them in a tough spot. Use the cards, use the range, use position, use whatever you can use. All right. Well, okay. So I guess we got to actually talk.
So as played,
yeah, thank you, Chris. Take us through it, pal.
As played, we get a limp in, or a complete in from the small blind. The big blind, our hero with 10-4 offsuit, checks, and the flop comes Jack 4-3 rainbow. And the small blind leads into a pot of about 200 and some, 120. So leads a little bit more than around half pot.
And I mean, it's not like we're sitting back there with 10-4 thinking, I can't wait to see a great flop for us, right? So like most of the time we're going to get to the flop and feel pretty bad about it. When the flop comes Jack 4-3, that's actually kind of an above average flop for us.
For sure.
So
hard to make a pair.
It's hard to make a pair. You said it, Rob.
It's hard to make middle pair with a 4 too. So like we're
yeah, good point. So I think in some cases, we might look down and say, I've got 10-4, the flop came Jack 4-3. Like this just isn't a spot to continue with, but that's an absolute way of thinking about hand strength. And we're talking about these blind versus blind situations, particularly in the limped pot. I think you kind of have, a responsibility to the math to continue with your hand here a little bit, to think of it as better than just a garbage hand. So I'm not folding, I don't think, in this spot when they open. And one of the weird things about these ranges is that you get to a point where it's like, how big do they have to bet before I fold, given that I'm just not giving them any respect no matter what they do here, right? Chris, do you have an insight into that? Because like, how does the sizing affect? Because when I said we're not folding, you were like, oh, we're not folding. But if he bet like 3 times as much, we'd consider it, right? Like, where's the line drawn? How do we decide?
Yeah. If they over bet the pot, I'm maybe considering it, but I don't think I am on this board yet. I'm not willing. I'd probably call a pot size bet on a Jack 4-3 rainbow board with 10-4, because we can still be ahead of a lot of their hands. They can have, some hands around the jack. They could have like queen 10, some backdoor, flush kind of stuff, or they could have 5-6 or 5-7 or 6-7, some gut shots. There's a lot of hands that we're ahead of that It's gonna have to be a really big bet for me to fold with this action.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. It's just it's we talked to the beginning. It's kind of just it's one of the functions of that dynamic, right? And again, it's villain dependent, right?
Yeah, I
But
was
I
going
do
to say
think
there's
that
some villains that are not going to bet unless they have a jack.
Yeah,
right.
right. Then it's an easy fold.
Yep.
Yep, exactly. I think so too. Yeah.
So the turn, so we call, and the turn is a 4.
Hello. We like
That's pretty
that.
good.
We like that.
And
I'm never folding now.
Yeah. So and this is interesting. The small blind checks, and then we elect. So let's see, what is the pot now? We've got probably around 460, 480, something like that in the pot. So again, we get about a half pot. We get a 250 half pot bet from from us. We bet about half pot after the small blind checks. I don't know. What do you think of that?
When they check, it's a function of the dynamic. I feel like they're displaying weakness. We should be bluffing a lot here, and so I want to also include some value hand. This is the way this is the way I think about it. I'm like, I want to be bluffing here a lot, so I also have to have some value hands, and we should be like choosing our sizing to accompany that. So, because most of the time we're not going to have a 4 here, but we're still going to want to take it away from our opponent. So they've made a pretty good bet pre-flop or on the flop, but they really have capped their range by checking the turn. I don't think they're checking a lot of jacks there, right? So what's our actual value target here with trip 4s? Just generally their range, the range that bets.
Probably draws. I
Yeah.
think you're targeting draws. You want to keep them in with the draw, but you want them to price them where if they call, they're making a mistake. But I think you can do that and they'll still call most of the time. I think you can choose that bet size. So now if he's got is there a flush draw on the board?
No, it's entirely rainbow.
Okay, so the only draw that he could really have would be a straight draw.
Yeah.
And
so we could have 5-6 or something like that, 5-7.
Right. So eight outs, right? So you don't really have to bet that much to price him off of a call.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
I like that. I think that's smart. So as played, the river comes a 7 and continues the rainbow. Let me just get down to the line here.
Well, I can't continue the rainbow unless there's 5 suits.
Oh, sorry. No, yeah, good point. Nothing comes in, I guess.
He said rainbow, but I think he just meant there's no flush.
There's no flush.
Yeah,
thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
It continues the rainbow. I'm going, wait a minute, what is it?
Yeah, that's right. That
It's
is
a
one
shamrock.
fancy rainbow.
It's the 7 of stars.
Yeah, let me just get to this here. Blah, blah, blah. So, and then the other player shoves the river. So we're in
check shoves.
Yes.
So I think this is a really interesting spot. So he checks and we bet and then shoves.
And that is a really interesting spot because we feel like absolute hand strength. We've kind of got this all wrapped up. There is a straight on the board, and of course there's a full house anytime there's a set, but we've got to be feeling pretty good about this hand as played, right?
Yeah, except I mean it is a spot where we just talked about what are the hands that they're doing this with, and it's a lot of those draws, and like the biggest, most blazing bright sky flare or draw is 5-6, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like 5-6 would play like this. So that's what it's clearly what villain either has or is representing.
And that's one of the points. I know we've taken a very circuitous route to get here, but this is one of the things that our friend Adam does so well in these posts is going through the combos and laying out people's range mathematically. And so he just looks at it right on the flop. Combos of sets, combos of 2-pair, top pair, trips, straight draws, and you can see it just by looking at it. Oh, for God's sake, John Somsky, you know I'm in the middle of trying to make a point here.
Then
Well,
fold.
and then how does the action then bear out those reads, right? Or those
Mm.
combinations? Which combinations check on the turn?
Right.
You know,
Right.
probably the sets don't check because the sets just made a full house.
Yeah, sets don't check. And I'm not even sure a jack checks on a jack 4-3-4
Right.
board. Maybe they do. Maybe the paired board slows them down a little with the jack, but I think that you probably should be betting your jacks there. And then if you get blown off it, then, you know, maybe you make a decision then. But if you've got a jack there, you still rate to have the best hand a lot.
All right. So we take the jacks out of his range and we take all the sets out of his range. What does that leave?
Mm-hmm.
That you're gonna, yeah. So yeah, if you do that, the only hands really that he could do what he did would be 3-7 or 5-6.
Or maybe another 4.
Yeah,
I mean,
good point. Good point.
he could
good
have
point.
the last 4 in the deck.
Would he check the 4 on the,
Yeah, that's a good
Turn, though?
question. I don't know.
you know, you're gonna want to try
Yeah,
to get
you're right,
more
because
value on the
we've just
turn.
called. Maybe we
Yep.
don't see a lot of checkbacks with or checks on the turn with the 4. So then
That's the thing,
when we
you
do
always
get
know
shoved
that,
here. Yeah, go
on the
ahead.
turn is where you need to make your value. So if you have a hand, you want to make your value on the turn. So if he doesn't have a hand, that's when he's going to be checking. When he has
Mhm.
that type of draw, that's when he's going to be checking.
Yep,
Yeah,
makes
and
sense to me.
when we get check shoved on, that's a pretty. I mean, that's you know, what are the bluffs? I guess what are the bluffs
Right.
are. Uh, what are the bluffs? What are the
Well,
bluffs
this is
here?
this is why I like these posts by ARW, because like he's so methodical about the range as it progresses through the hand. And like if you're consistent about assigning the range, you can just look at the combos on the flop, look at the combos on the turn as you take these hands out of the player's range as they continue through the action. You'll see there's just only so many combos left. Most of them are in these value heavy spots. And it's remarkable because we started with two limping players with extremely wide ranges. But by the time we look at the action, and this is something that like Chris Jones leads in the focus every month using Flopzilla and tools like that to help range our opponents and remove combos from their range as they proceed through action points. And even when you start with very wide ranges, if you're thoughtful about the action, you'd be surprised how narrow you can get that range by the time you get to a final decision point on the river. So, Chris, what do you think? Are there enough bluffs in that range to feel like it's a decision? Because the way we talk about it
I mean,
now, we're standing there with trips.
it
There's only one straight on the board, but we're like,
it feels to me like it almost has to be, and I don't know that our villain would do this, but like the bluffs have to be 7s that are turning themselves into a bluff, right? It's like the
Right.
5-7, it's like 6-7, something like that. Or maybe we can, I guess this is a total limped pot. So maybe can small blind have like 6 deuce or 5 deuce or something like that?
Could unplug it.
I mean,
yeah,
I suppose those can be the bluffs. But you know, a lot of people will fold 6 deuce Even
not
from
Rob. No, that's a straighter, baby. You're not folding that.
But I don't know. This is
Oh,
a tough call. I don't know what I would do with this.
yeah.
And it makes me what I was wanting to ask was, is this a river? Yes, we have trip fours, but is this a river that we should check back?
Interesting.
Because what are we when we bet? What are we hoping to be called? I guess we're hoping to be called by a jack, right? We're hoping that they check called a jack, and then
check the jack on the turn.
then check to jack on the river, and are check calling with their jack on the river.
Well, they checked on the turn also.
Right. So we're
Yeah.
hoping to get
So,
check called
yeah.
twice with a jack.
Pretty narrow range there, given
Yeah,
the wide range that they started the hand with, right?
Right.
The only other thing is, and I don't know if it's just me incorrectly doing this actually, is I never give credit to anyone in the blinds. And that seems to be more likely, or more common, I should say. So it seems like they might be betting with more air. There might be a reason to bet your set because they won't believe you, and then they might call. But I don't know if this is just a perception I have or a bad habit that I have, or if there's anything to that whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty common though too. It's hard to give credit to anybody actually having a hand in the blinds.
Yeah.
Because it's especially limp. So what could they possibly have? Anything.
And we fall into this trap of, we see these flops, like not this one, but we see a flop like 4, 5, 7, and we're like, oh well, that opening, that blind has such a wide range, they're smashing that. And it's like the fact that they have a wide range doesn't mean that they just smash every bad flop. They've got other combos in their range that don't smash that flop. Maybe that wasn't a good example of a flop, but wide ranges just don't do well post flop, period. There's some boards that they're better for, but generally they just have a bunch of air. So your best tool is still to get them to fold, unless you've got exactly that kind of hand that wants a call from second best, but that's not likely. Okay, well, again, I'm not sure Adam's going to feel very satisfied by the answer that we gave over the course of the episode, but I think we did get into some good stuff there, and I'm very surprised at how sort of confidently we were able to range our opponent down to that. Although Adam wouldn't be surprised, because he says in his post at the bottom, in game, I came to the conclusion very quickly that the villain had 6-5 and rivered straight. It was the best possible draw on the flop, which our villain bet. And it makes sense to check behind and check on the turn. So he goes into all these great points in here about how that is true. And then, of course, calls anyway, because we have to see it to know, right? That's part of that. We want to be sure.
And he was right.
He was right. Yeah, I was right. I win the game of guessing correctly my opponent's cards, right? And that's what we're doing after all, right? I do that all the time. And I keep telling myself, it's okay, Jim. You're just practicing now. When the time comes, you'll use all this savvy of knowing that you're right, and you won't call when it really matters, because
you will.
We'll see.
Hard to fold trips.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. Well, it sure is. I'm not sure we're going to get to a better point than that to wrap things up. So unless someone has some additional insight to share with the group, I do think it's hard to fold trips, and I think all said and done. Well, thanks for sticking with us, group. Adam, cheers, and thanks for writing. Website AMP, Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Rob, John, Chris, thanks everybody. See you again soon.